Welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph Dimichis, one of the calendar's astrologers. The portrait this time was requested by one of our viewers. It is Daniel Day-Lewis, one of the most honored of actors of our current era. Daniel was born on April 29th, 1957, a Monday. He was Monday's child. He was born in London, England, even though his father was from Ireland, so he claims both Irish and English citizenship. And we don't have a time. And we actually resist doing too many charts for people when we don't have the time, because there's a lot of people where we do have the time and it's simply a lot easier and more accurate. But this was requested, and also it's an opportunity to talk a little bit about how you rectify a chart. Now, on that day, he was born with the Sun in Taurus, 8 degrees. Also, Venus in Taurus, so in her feminine rulership position, you might call her extrovert, responsive position. Okay? Mercury is also in Taurus. So he has the Sun, Mercury, and Venus in Taurus. And the Mercury is conjunct the South Node at 19 degrees Taurus, and Ceres at 20 degrees Taurus. Now, the only other player in there is the small asteroid Astrea at 11 degrees between the Sun and Venus. So that's really a stellium in Taurus, and the fact that it's conjunct the South Node means that this is something he has done before. This is a reincarnational talent. This is some place where he in previous lifetimes was doing similar types of work within the arts. Taurus, of course, is the art. The Mercury being so conjunct to the South Node really tells us something. It's a lot about language. It's a lot about ideas, right? So we really have to look to see, well, where are the signs that rule Mercury prominent? Well, they're very prominent. He has Mars in Gemini, the most masculine. We think of it as the most masculine sign, but it's actually the most aggressive of planets. In Gemini, right? The dynamic or masculine ruler of Mars. The Jupiter, the other big player, is in Virgo at 22 degrees Virgo retrograde. Interesting, right? So you have basically a square going on between the Jupiter and the Mars, both in Mercury-ruled signs. Interesting, huh? Now, the Moon. The Moon was an issue where we had to discuss the rectification, because when I looked at the original chart, it was set for noontime, and in there, he has the Moon in Taurus, but at 2 degrees Taurus. So if he's born early in the day, as the majority of people are, the Moon would be in Aries. Now, I have to tell you, having seen a bunch of his movies and read a bit about him, he does not strike me as a Taurus Moon person. He could strike me definitely as a Taurian, with that strong mercurial quality from the Mars and the Jupiter, but he does not strike me as a Taurus Moon person. He doesn't look like a Taurus Moon person. But Moon in Aries, that you get. The Ram, that you get. And it's interesting, I was reading in his bio where they talked about him being a young actor. He started acting quite young. He comes from an acting family. His mother was an actress. His father was the poet laureate of England. One of his uncles was very involved in the developing the British film industry. So he married, he was born into the right family for this kind of work. But they describe him as a young actor having like this inner fire. Well, that inner fire, that sounds like the Moon in Aries, because when you look at the rest of the chart, all that Sun, Moon, Mercury, all that's Earth. Mars is in a air sign. Jupiter's in an Earth sign. The only other major visible planet that's actually not in one of those, but in a fire sign, is Saturn. And that really got me thinking, because when you look at his bio, one of the things they say about him is that he's a very private person. He very rarely gives interviews. People know very little bit about his private life. And this actually goes back to an older model with actors, more in his generation. He was born in 1957, after all, where people didn't know a lot about their private life. They knew about their public work, but not their private life. And you see this in a lot of actors from that era, and even a little later, where all the planets are below the horizon. In other words, the personal life is very, very active, but is not in the public view. But above the horizon is usually one planet or maybe two that are very visible, and people see them through that. So that got us thinking. Now, the other thing we looked at is, what does he look like? And we have, lots of photographs of him. And in looking at him, knowing what we know about his chart with Taurus, and Taurus tends to be bigger, wider. And he's quite trim. He's quite bony, high cheekbones. If you see him in Lincoln, which is a masterful performance, very high cheekbones. And he has them naturally. They may have been accented, to create that Aquarian Capricorn look that Lincoln had. But this is natural to him. And this is something you find typically with Capricorn. Strong Capricorn in the chart. But when we look in his chart, there's no planets in Capricorn. Now, yeah, the other ram is the moon in Aries, but people often get confused about the ram in Capricorn. We think of Capricorn as the goat. That's not its true name. Capricorn is the sea goat. And think of what you think of as the sea goat, and at the time, think of the sea lion or the seal. And when you talk about how you talk about the Capricorn personality, it very much describes, the goat's body with the fish's tail. They saw it as a mythical creature. No, that's the seal, or that's the sea lion. They climb up on the rocks. They live up in the air, but then they spend so much of their time submerged in the water, just the way Capricorns like to be submerged in their society, and yet they still want to climb to the top of the rock and get in the sun. That's part of their achievement. Capricorns many times like to work in high-rise buildings. They like to climb. Finding someone with strong Capricorn, they always have a multi-story house. They're not going to have a single-story house. There's no stairs to climb. What are we going to do in this house? That's Capricorn. And you look at him, he's darker, which you expect with an Earth person. If he had Sagittarius rising or Aries or Leo, there'd be some red. But he has dark hair, dark eyes. He's a little pale. Admittedly, he's Irish, and because it could be black Irish, they're quite dark, but no, he's quite pale. And this is really a look you see very strongly with Capricorn. It's reinforced by that moon in Aries. That additional ramminess, shows up, but the Aries rising doesn't give you that kind of face. I would really go with the Capricorn rising. I don't see anything. I thought about Pisces, but Pisces is usually a little softer. Leo, there's no fire there. There's no, Gemini maybe, but then we go to these other signs. What happens is we lose that Aries moon. We get the Taurus moon. And that's problematic. That's problematic. And the thing that's interesting too is he has a great love of craftsmanship. In fact, when he had actually at one point he applied for a 5-year apprenticeship as a cabinet maker. And they turned him down because of his lack of experience. So instead he was brought into the Old Vic Theater and really got into a serious acting career. And then at one point he actually stopped acting and did an apprenticeship in Italy on making shoes. So we know that Virgo craftsmanship is really important. So if we pivot the chart around to Capricorn rising, now that's real interesting. This gets very, very interesting. And Capricorn rising, a lot of times, people with Capricorn rising have difficult childhoods. And he in some ways had a difficult childhood. He lived in South London. He had to deal with a lot of difficult kids, tough kids. And he said his real first acting gig was learning all of the local accents and mannerisms so he would fit in, because they thought he was very posh. Also, through his mother, he was Jewish, and so he was Jewish and posh, and he got bullied over that, but he learned how to learn all these different qualities. That's the Mars in Gemini. And the Mars in Gemini is in the 6th house, which is about our basic skill set. One of his great skill sets is language. Sixth house, Gemini, that's all language. There's a lot in here where you really see the craftsman, the craftsmanship, his craft is very important to him. If you have Capricorn rising, that puts Jupiter in Virgo in the 9th house. That's a powerful house for Jupiter. It's one of Jupiter's own 2 houses, right? 2 houses. It puts Saturn in Sagittarius in the 12th house. The 12th house is so pivotal in people who work in the movies. 12th house is make-believe. Saturn and Sag, right? Saturn and Sag is a funny position because it's Saturn in the sign of Jupiter. And it's a real interesting position. It combines the hard work and the enthusiasm at the same time, the athleticism. And he's done roles that were very athletic. The first role I saw him in, that I remembered him in, was Last of the Mohicans, which was tremendously athletic. And also very Saturn and Sagittarius. I mean, very, very much make-believe. In this place of lakes and rivers. It's very powerful. So here we have all of his personal planets would be below the horizon with a Capricorn rising, but above the horizon, out for the world to see, is Saturn in the 12th house. And Saturn likes the 12th house. It's kind of a funny thing about Saturn, seems to do very well in the 12th house. And Jupiter in the 10th house, or the 9th house, trining the rising. So tremendously supporting, so his willingness to do his craftsmanship, to work on his skill set, really supported that. He also gives him Neptune in the 11th house, which is very good for the media, and Uranus in the 8th house, which is kind of interesting. It means something unusual about the way in which he exhibits power. That Capricorn rising, they're really willing to do the work. It's also very traditional in certain ways. There's other stuff going on here. There's like a loose trine that goes on between the Uranus in the 8th house and the 12th house. The Uranus in the 8th house would have to do with how he works with other people in Leo. And when he's a method actor, even though he went to the old Vic, he's very much a method actor. He actually oftentimes will stay in character all the way through a movie, speaking in the same accent. Once again, he's great with accents. It's this tremendous talent for accents, for mannerisms. Mars and Gemini, Jupiter and Virgo. Stay in that same one and do a lot of things that really get him into the sense of it. I'm trying to remember what movie it was where he had to lose, they said, 2 stone. It sounds like a lot of weight for the role. And then he had the crew members splash him with buckets of cold water because he was supposed to be in prison, and actually wrote letters to other cast members from prison. And this is method acting. This is really powerful. And that, to a certain extent, may go down to where the midheaven is. You see, that's interesting. When I first started doing the rectification, I thought, well, I'm thinking, a different latitude. So I'm thinking, well, it's got to be, 90 degrees from Taurus. So I'm thinking either Aquarius rising or maybe Pisces rising. I wasn't thinking Capricorn, but I forgot London is relatively far north. So you can have a chart at 2 o'clock in the morning where the sun and Venus are in the 5th house of creativity early in the morning. You don't see that at lower latitudes. You can see that at northern latitudes. And the 5th house is the house of creativity. And you can't say that, no way you can say this man is not tremendously creative. He's not a natural born artist, which is what you would expect with the South Node conjunct Mercury. Mercury has a lot to do with acting. Venus, the arts, conjunct the sun, the energy, the primal energy. And the other thing that's interesting too about the idea that you felt that energy burning from within the person, Capricorn rising, the first impression of the person it's a little formal, but what's burning inside of it? Why would the moon in the moon in Aries be so prominent, burning inside him? Well, it's from the fourth house in this chart, the home. The moon in the fourth house is tremendously powerful. It's her own house. She's in her own house, but it's in Aries. Aries is a sign the moon actually really likes. There's a certain relationship that goes on there now. It's, kind of like the favorite son. And he was, the son. He was actually the son of his father's second wife. He had two half brothers, but he had himself and a sister who went on to become a TV chef and writer. But that creativity he found in his home. And they have Juno and Pallas Athena also in the fourth house. He grew up with great creativity in his home, right? And, it's part of his core self. And here's the key. When we encounter a person, first we encounter their rising, then whatever planets come after that. So the first house you encounter, the first planet you encounter in a house is the first thing you really encounter when you get to meet a person. He has a certain formality because of the Capricorn rising, but there's nothing in Capricorn. In the second house, there's Aquarius and the black moon Lilith, but you don't see those. That's part of his experience of the world. He has a sense of the woundingness that comes from the media. His father was a very prominent man. And then the third house is Pisces, but there he has Vesta. Vesta in the third house, Pisces, the making up language, Hygeia, which is health. And then finally in the fourth house, you have Juno and Pallas, two more asteroids, which is the importance of marriage, married to one person for a long time. And Pallas Athena, skill sets, that writing especially. And the first visible planet that you encounter as you go from the first, second, third is the moon in the fourth house in Aries, that burning energy. And here's where it gets real interesting. That moon is void of course. Okay, the only aspect it makes, technically you could say it's not quite void of course because it makes a trine to Pluto in the 8th house. Okay, maybe it's, okay, but Pluto's not a major player in this. It's late in the sign. What that void of course moon does in the late in the sign like that in the 4th house is it makes it tremendously responsive to input. In other words, its own agenda is late in the game. We say that when the moon is void, of course, the moon has moved into a sign. There's no more connections. She's kind of on her own. She's in response mode. She's going to go wherever she wants to go. And it's an Aries, so it's all about engagement and about creating. The 4th house is one of the most creative houses. It's where babies are birthed, right? Creating Aries, a personality. He has a particular genius for creating a character. That's very cool. That's very cool. And on the 5th house, he has this huge font of creativity and history and lifetimes of artistry there to support that. And it's just perfect for an actor. And then he projects it out to the 12th house. In the theater, and then the Jupiter so highly elevated, the Neptune highly elevated. It's no surprise he's recognized. People can see this out there in the world. And they even can see things that they don't recognize, like through Neptune. They can imagine it. He sparks the imagination. So it's a fascinating chart. A tremendously creative person, very complex, not standard. You have, I wouldn't say the standard actors' charts, but his is not. His is quite unique. It was really kind of designed for a very specific purpose. And he's not done a huge number of films. He's been very selective in his roles. He knows how much he invests himself in them. So that's Daniel Day-Lewis, the chart. That's my guess of rectification. Now, any other astrologers out there have other ideas about his rising? which of course would switch the moon a little bit and the house positions. We are completely open to listening to that, because this is not quite saddleback rectification, but pretty close. And make sure you come see us on Tuesdays when we do our portraits. Come see us on Fridays when we do our forecasts. You can find those on YouTube at Planetary Calendar Astrology. You can also go to planetarycalendar.com to find your calendars, our day planner, our pocket version, our original size version, and we like to call it our extra large version. And of course, there's also the digital one that you can use on your phone. So until next time, be well.